So now that we have a good idea of the think approach to critical and creative thinking, as well as how we might refine and revise it to be most relevant to our course content and field, in this next series of modules and lessons, we're going to dive more deeply into some teaching strategies that encourage these thinking behaviors. And we'll start with intellectual risk taking, which is really at the root of think. Two of the upcoming strategies we'll be discussing, intellectual risk taking and self reflection, are both meta strategies that are used continually throughout the critical and creative thinking process and key to providing flexible, adaptable, and transferable thinking. So, what kind of risk taking are we talking about? We're talking about being flexible, being comfortable with ambiguity or uncertainty, being curious, seeking questions, persistent, and divergent thinking, to name a few. We're also talking about risk taking that is reasoned and informed and critical. Take a moment to reflect on what this means to you in your discipline and in your classroom. Is it important for your discipline and within your curriculum for students to be able to take intellectual risks? Why or why not? Do you encourage it in your classroom now, and how? This quote by Bucky Fuller, "There's no such thing as a failed experiment, only experiments with unexpected outcomes," really sums up the essence of why intellectual risk taking is so important. So, in this lesson, we will be discussing ways to enhance the culture of our classrooms, whereby risk is not a bad thing to be avoided, but where students feel supported to explore things that they do not know, to test methods they have not refined, and to admit to unexpected outcomes and reflect on how and why they occurred so that that new knowledge fuels later work. Psychological research has identified a number of ways in which entrepreneurs and innovators differ from other people. A key difference is their tolerance for risk. Research findings suggest that entrepreneurs perceive business scenarios more positively than other people, and that they are more likely to perceive strengths rather than weaknesses, opportunities versus threats, and potential for performance improvement versus deterioration. Incorporating risk taking into a curriculum enables students to make more decisions and to experiment with different ideas and approaches through an active learning process. Risk taking is a cognitive process and can be learned and refined with practice. So, how can we make informed and responsible risk taking a learning objective within our course? Are there places in your curriculum that can be set up as safe spaces for this type of thinking? We want to learn to anticipate, take, and manage risk as a learning objective, which includes understanding or predicting reward or consequence in both negative and positive terms, learning from and valuing failure through metacognitive reflections, understanding error as a central part of learning, and encouraging informed discussions by acting on reasonable risk reward assessment. The value of taking risk in most professions is recognized, but often in our students' lives, it is something to be managed, avoided, or eliminated. There are many good intentioned reasons why risk taking has been discouraged, but in the long term, it can have unintended consequences for students and society. And in some ways, encouraging risk taking in the classroom can also be risky for the instructor, so we have to embrace the principles of risk taking ourselves. Barriers to risk taking are the perception of loss versus gain. Most people do not perceive loss and gain in equal measure. For instance, research suggests that most people tend to be more sensitive to decreases in wealth than increases. Frequent progress checks. Risk takers generally do not focus on short term outcomes or the myopic view. Predictable outcomes and objectives. Often, teachers and professionals alike prefer activities with planned and predictable outcomes and discourage failure. And the fear of failure. Throughout their K 12 education, students are evaluated through academic achievement, which typically does not encourage divergent activities and can contribute to risk avoidance and a fear of failure in the long run. Lack of ownership over decisions. Tightly controlled activities and results by over involved adults, whether it's parents, teachers, or mentors, keep students from exploring diverse possibilities and making decisions for themselves. And finally, the lack of time. To allow for risk taking activities in the classroom, projects must have sufficient time and resources for open ended explorations. So, what are some strategies that we can use to encourage intellectual risk taking? We can create a safe place for students to voice opinions, answer questions, or state hypotheses. We can provide low stakes opportunities where it's okay for students to fail as long as they learn from their failure. And we can make sure that instructors and TAs should have clear, distinct roles in projects, allowing students to take ownership of their decision. We can also give students opportunities to design or define aspects of their assignment or project. We can foster an environment that supports independent thinking, and we can ask questions that are open ended and do not advocate specific solutions. We can also factor into the project reflection exercises, which students use to report on their experiences and lessons learned. We can engage students in exploring the course content with applied real world issues, including external champions where possible. And we can discuss case studies and precedents of risk takers within the discipline whose risks transformed the field in some way. Experiencing risk inevitably involves experiencing failure. Research on resilience suggests that successful management of risk is a powerful factor in promoting resilience to adverse events. Risk in the safe environment of the classroom allows students to experience the emotional impact of risk taking without the damaging consequences. Distributed risk taking also encourages students to not put all of their eggs in one basket, but to explore a number of possible and appropriate options. And finally, risk taking skills have been shown to improve confidence and resiliency to setbacks. Students who learn to take risks are more resourceful, resilient, and empowered. If risk taking is a learned process, can we make it a learning objective within our course? Most of our disciplines are built on processes and methods which incorporate risk taking because they involve stages of decision making, experimentation, testing, observation, and adaptation. However, there is evidence that teaching in the classroom often fails to include risk taking by giving prominence to knowledge and understanding rather than inquiry. For those reasons, the applied fields are often seen as lending themselves to innovative practices and risk taking more easily than more academic. Types of intellectual risk taking can range from things like thinking of creative, wild ideas and developing and embracing them, speaking up and answering questions or expressing ideas within the classroom, expressing or evaluating personal values, experiences, and beliefs within the context of a problem or solution, and exploring methods, processes, or tools that students have never done before. Remember, to encourage long-term informed intellectual risk-taking, you need to create a safe learning environment in the classroom for all students. We need to provide opportunities where it's okay to fail as long as students learn from those failures. And we need to value and assess inquiry and risk. In some cases, that might mean valuing risk and learning reflection over the success of the final work.